This episode is proudly supported by Fine Food Australia. It's only a few weeks until Fine Food Australia, the country's leading trade event for food service and hospitality, is back on in Sydney. As a professional in the food industry, you know the importance of staying ahead, discovering new trends, connecting with suppliers, and finding the inspiration to move your business forward. For over 40 years, Fine Food Australia has been the ultimate destination for chefs, restaurateurs, cafe owners, food retailers, and distributors alike. With over 900 exhibitors across 12 product categories, featuring both local and global brands, Fine Food Australia is where you'll find what's next, what's new, and what's driving the food industry forward. Make sure you register online before the 8th of September to secure free trade entry, so you don't have to pay $45 at the door. Don't miss Fine Food Australia on from the 8th to the 11th of September at ICC Sydney Darling Harbour. For more information, go to www.finefoodaustralia.com.au.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging.
The whole, kind of wine and food matching is really interesting. But, if you only got one bottle in the fridge, well, bloody hell, whether it's white or red, doesn't really matter what it is. Enjoy it with whatever you're eating that night.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Andrew Caillard is the embodiment of a true wine professional. He carries himself with grace, humility and honour, and holds a global reputation as one of the most dedicated wine scholars of our time. Master of Wine, author of the Australian Ark, co-founder of Langton's Fine Wine Auctions, and associate producer of acclaimed wine fills such as Red Obsession and Blind Ambition. Andrew is a respected historian and an all-round authoritative voice of the wine world. I have no idea how he's made time to join me today, but I'm thrilled he has. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Shanteh.
It is such a pleasure to have you on. Every time I get to kind of cross your landscape, I'm thrilled to have a chat to you. So thank you so much.
Oh, no, it's lovely to be here.
Oh, well, I've got quite a lot to thank you for all the work that you do. But from the last time we spoke, we talked a little bit about identity and names, and you encouraged me to change my son's name, which I have gone and done. So thank you for that.
Oh, really? Gosh, that was a bit presumptuous of me to be doing that.
Not at all. We're in the back of a bus talking about how we form our identity and our lineage. And I said, I feel like I missed the boat, not popping some of my Chinese ancestry into my son's name, and you told me, just go and do it, and I did, and I'm so thrilled for that conversation.
That's absolutely brilliant. And I have a Chinese daughter-in-law, and so I'm very kind of familiar with the culture, and I think it's brilliant that you're doing that.
What a beautiful family you do have. That's exactly what we're speaking about, all the incredible cultures that come into your household. Now, I'm glad that you're the historian, because trying to go back into your history of where wine started is quite the tale. So we do have to go back a bit of a ways into where you grew up. First, I want to know, let's go back to kind of little Andrew growing up at Ludlow in Shropshire, and kind of how you ended up back, in Australia, I suppose.
Yeah. So my father was in the Royal Air Force, and every 3 years, as a family, we would have to move. So it made sense to go to boarding school. So I went to a boarding school, a prep school called Moore Park in Ludlow in Shropshire, which is very close to the Welsh border. But my mother is Australian, and so we were always brought up as being half Australian, half English. And so as we, got older, I always had a yearning to go to Australia and find out about it. And I didn't really get to do that until after I've left secondary school, which we call public school, a boarding school in Sussex. And after I left school, I went out to Australia and I absolutely loved it and wanted to come back. But but there was a little bit of a problem, and that is as I had taken the Queen's shilling, and I was destined to join the British Army, and so I had to go back to England to join the army, and that's what I did, and that turned out to be a disaster, and that's how I came back to Australia again. Yeah.
And your mother was a Radaladian, which is pretty cool. Is that where you first went to when you came out to Australia?
Yeah, she came. No, not at all. She was born in Adelaide, and she came from a very old Adelaide family. Well, her mother did, called the Ronells, and they were one of the first early vignerons in South Australia. So there was always that kind of underlying wine culture that was kind of bubbling away during my childhood. And so when I arrived in Australia, I came out on a container ship actually in the early 80s. I met somebody at a party, and they told me about Roseworthy Agricultural College. And so when I went down to Adelaide, and I was 23, I was taken up to Roseworthy by a friend who took me up via actually McGill, because she said to me, her name was Sarah Dryden, said to me, you should look at this because what they're doing is just monstrous and destroying the Grange vineyard. So I saw all of these, kind of earth movers, kind of removing vines from the old, from McGill estate, from the larger extended vineyards on my way to being interviewed by Bryce Rankin. And then Bryce Rankin, who was the dean of Roseworthy Agricultural College, said I was too sick really to do the enology course because I didn't really have any science qualifications, and so I did the marketing course and had a lot of winemaking in it. But which I really enjoyed actually. It was great.
And then when was the decision to move over here? When did that happen?
To Australia? Mm. Yeah. Well, I made that decision in 1970. Not 79, 1981. I was really keen to go over. So I was doing lots of things. I really was very unfocused, didn't know what I was going to do. I was completely underqualified. And I was desperate to get out of England. And so I eventually, got a free ride on a container ship out to Australia in 1982, and I arrived in Sydney just before Christmas that year, and I've lived here ever since.
Well, I'm glad that you've got your beautiful accent because
I managed to keep it, which is amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen you with a few beers under your belt, so who knows if that may change.
No.
But when did you meet your wonderful wife?
Well, I met her when I was in Sydney, and I was working with a business called the Australian Wine Centre, which I was a partner in, and that was a very unsuccessful venture for me. But I did meet my wife, and in fact, the day she arrived, when she left, I said I'm going to marry that girl one day, and that's a true story. And so we did, and we're still here together after all those years.
Look, it doesn't surprise me. I have to say, before we ever met, I was working as an assistant sommelier at Key, and I was really the person that just moved a box from one place to another in my spare time. And your wife would come through the door delivering your wine, or both of your wines, and she would stop and have a chat. And I was in awe because I wasn't, the head sommelier, and we would have this lovely chat. And I don't think there was anybody else that was delivering their own wines. And I thought, my goodness, she is just something else. So I completely understand that you were taken with her the first moment you met her.
Yeah, well, that's a lovely thing. We don't make any wine anymore. We stopped a while ago, but it was a great thing to do, and especially as at the time I was also working with Woolworths, which was also become Endeavour Group. And, if you really do understand when you're making your own wine, the hip pocket nerve and how bloody difficult it is not only to make wine, that's the easy part, but actually distribution is incredibly difficult. And, especially, with restaurants on the on-premise, with sommeliers moving around all the time and, loyalties. And Bobby, my wife, used to call it, that wine inventor is my dream, her reality. And the reality was it was just really, really hard. And then one day, Bobby asked me, he said, do you really want to continue this? Because I'm not really enjoying it anymore. And I, I was always jumping anything that was creative, jumping off to doing that and not really putting enough effort into that, kind of project. So we decided to stop because our inventory was getting, higher and higher. But during COVID, we managed to sell everything, which was incredible. And that was all Bobby's work. Yeah.
I think things like this, like you said, they are a really good exercise, even if it's for a short period of time, to really, you see the nitty gritty and like you said, how challenging it can be. But the Mataro that, I first tried of yours was a wonderful expression of Mataro. And it was great to kind of learn about people through really the label. I mean, talking about you, I've talked about your painting more, in those early days than I knew anything more about what you did. But yeah, really lovely.
We did that project for 10 years and really, really enjoyed it. And, my connection with the Barossa Valley is much stronger for that. But, even from a historical point of view, kind of making Mataro and doing all the research, the more you kind of dig into Australia's past, and its ambitions as a wine-making country, and I kind of had been doing it beforehand. But the Mataro story is incredible. There was more Mataro planted in the Barossa Valley than Shiraz, during the 1890s and, and at the turn of the century. And that's, I think, is incredible.
I love that you were kind of inspired to look into that further through some of your reading. But let's go back a bit further as well. So your great-great-great-grandfather was John Raynell. Now, you know of that history, but when did wine cross your hand and you think this is kind of cool? Or was it that kind of attention to and that detail that was in your family that made it more significant?
My mother used to talk about it a lot because the Raynell family has a very tragic kind of history. So my great-grandfather was killed at Gallipoli in 1915. And I know it sounds like a hell of a long time ago, but that had real ramifications. My grandmother was still alive and, relatively young, and that was her father. And her brother was also killed in the Second World War in the Battle of Britain. And, so there was that kind of slightly grim, kind of past and everything. And we were always told about that. So we always knew as we were growing up, we all knew about the Raynell story and about what happened and everything. And it's magnificent and it's tragic at the same time. But, in terms of wine drinking, I mean, my parents drank wine and enjoyed it, but they didn't drink copious amounts. And, they drank fairly modestly, things like Valpolicella and, kind of Chianti and those kind of things, you could buy from the supermarket. And my father wasn't really a big drinker. He really enjoyed beer and he preferred whiskey. And he used to always talk about, all the wine talk and everything and say, well, it's just lolly water, which is typical of him. But really, when I was at school, and I know this is going to sound funny to a lot of people of your generation, but when I was at school, I went to a public school in England called Worth, and we had a wine club. And you could join the wine club at 16 and taste wine, and it was brilliant. And not only that, we used to go and have exeats, and we had friends who just lived around the corner from where we were, a little bit, about a 20-minute drive. And we used to stay weekends, and he was a big wine aficionado, and he'd open up bottles of wine, and we were allowed to drink it, when really at the age of 16 onwards, possibly even earlier. So wine was never really anything that was, overly special, because it was a part of our lives as we were growing up.
That doesn't actually surprise me, considering it's England and it's past, and it was really more of a cultural expression or something that you needed to learn as part of life, really, wasn't it?
Well, I suppose so, but I think also when I was growing up, England really was a beer drinking country, and it was really while I was growing up that England transitioned. I mean, a lot of well-heeled English people who, bought Bordeaux and bought them, in barrel and stuff like that, and had them. It was something that people did. But yeah, certainly, from a cultural point of view, I think, as I was growing up, wine was becoming more and more important in England. That's for sure.
So let's go to Roseworthy. You did your ag degree, and then you left, and was Brokenwood your first kind of job after that?
Yeah, so I didn't do a degree. I did a thing called an associate diploma in wine marketing. As I was saying, before, I was too thick to do the enology course. I wasn't actually too thick. It was just that I hadn't really found an interest that would capture my mind. And in fact, when I was at Roseworthy, I really got an interest in science. And there are a couple of lecturers who are both still alive, Dr. Patrick Ireland and Dr. Peter Dry, who were very, very instrumental in me becoming interested in wine, and really just animated everything and made everything making sense, and I absolutely loved it. So while I was at Roseworthy, one of the things we had to do is we would have to spend a term working, work experience for a winery, and so I landed up via the help of Len Evans and James Halliday. I managed to get a job at Brokenwood, working with Ian Riggs, and that was one of the happiest times of my life. I was there for about 10 weeks, and it was just eye-opening for me in every single way.
I love those early days, like you said, often it's during university or a time of great learning where the world is open wide to you and you're having brand new experiences. Brokenwood has been that for so many people. Is the Hunter still a special place in your heart?
Well, it is from a memory point of view. I was actually I was the very, very first intern, and because I think it was quite successful, that then others followed. People like Wayne Donaldson, who went and did some great things in America and sparkling wine, and others. But I've got very, very fond memories of the Hunter Valley, but I don't go there very often. Like over the last 20 years, I've been to Bordeaux more often than the Hunter Valley, and the Hunter Valley, where I am right now, is only about an hour and a half away. But I think that highlights also that where the Hunter Valley is really kind of placed in terms of fine wine agenda. But I was there only just a couple of months ago, actually, with Ian Riggs again, and I loved it. I loved the whole wine community in the Hunter Valley is very, very special, very, very close knit and very encouraging of each other. I was really, really impressed. But I was also really loved, looking at where the old vineyards were, and that's what Ian was showing me, all of old Audrey Wilkinson's vineyards, and all the old, famous vineyards of the 19th century, and I found that absolutely fascinating. So in some respects, I'm kind of rediscovering the Hunter Valley again just right now.
I mean, someone like yourself, as a historian, out of all the things you've done, you have to have a curious mind, and that's certainly what you do have. And it doesn't surprise me that anywhere you go, you would discover something more you wanted to know. Tell me a little bit about kind of how wine auctions kind of came about and your interest in those, because you had a few different roles before kind of meeting Stuart Langton. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, after I left Roseway, things were not at all easy. I got a job at the Wine Society as a technical manager, which everyone joked about because I'm the least technical person in the world. But and I did enjoy that. But I felt I wanted more, and I'd met these French people, and we were involved in buying out the Australian Wine Centre, but that was not much fun. It was horrible. I didn't enjoy the people I had partners with, and I was a little bit naive, to be quite honest, and so I left there, and I did a whole lot of other things, and so I was very unsure of myself. But my youngest brother, who was really interested in the arts, had joined a company called Rushton Fine Arts. And I met Colin McWilliam through that. And Colin McWilliam was running the kind of fledgling wine department there, and he invited me to join. And so I did. And that's how I started off as an auctioneer. But I had to do things like I had to do a real estate license, and I had to do a course, an auctioneer's course. I've never sold real estate in my life, but I had to have a real estate license to sell wine, and everything had to be run through trust accounts and all sorts of things. And selling wine at auction in those days was just kind of nickel and diming. But I got in at the very beginning, and so really was very much involved in developing a fine wine market in Australia through the auction process. And then I met Stuart Langton when I was at Rushton's, because I think I was his main competitor, and he saw me as a threat. So he changed it into an opportunity and invited me to set up an auction, kind of house here in Sydney, which I did in the late 1980s. And that was another story, because it was very difficult. I mean, Langton's nearly folded a few times, and one of our partners sold his billiard table just to keep us afloat. It was for many, many years, it was kind of, touch and go whether we would survive. But anyway, we did survive.
I love little snippets like that, and I appreciate you being so open in this interview, because when you look at your CV and what you've accomplished, but sharing the stories about not knowing exactly where you were going to go, what trail you're going to go down, what you didn't enjoy, this long journey of getting to the point where you are now. It's so nice for people to hear as they're starting out their careers or midway through them, knowing that it doesn't all fall at your feet, and there's lots of moments where you're going to be unsure.
Yeah, well, I think if I'm really honest about it, my whole story was one of, kind of a whole, kind of linkage of failure. And then failing is, looking back, is not necessarily a bad thing, because you learn from those experiences and you get better at what you do. And, it's only really in the last, now that I'm kind of, and I'm not semi-retired, but, my world's very different now than it has been. But I have a little time for reflection and realize actually that journey of trial and error has actually allowed me to have a very, very interesting career, or certainly a very fulfilling career.
Certainly interesting, that's for sure. Tell me a little bit about that Langton's classification of Australian wine and the discussions around why that was important for the industry.
Well, I was, when I started off, the whole wine market was very, very small. I mean, it was really the size of a postage stamp and of no interest to the wine industry itself, really. The main wines that had any kind of price evolution were really imported wines, mainly Bordeaux. Burgundy was hardly on the scene. Champagne, definitely not. Port, definitely. And then in terms of Australian wines, Penfolds, and then a few others like Mosswood coming through, and Balgownie, and a whole lot of even names. That Lake's Folly is another one. They kind of got a little bit of interest, but there wasn't really any form of benchmarking or anything like that. And so I wrote an article for a now defunct magazine, and I can't even remember what it's called. I think it was called Wine Life or something like that. And then I wrote another article for the Wine Industry Journal on the auction market, and I did a list of performers, what was called performers, and then out of that. When I moved over from Rushton's to Langton's, one of the first things that I did was we converted that into a classification of Australian wine, but it was a little bit loose, and so we rejigged it the following year and made a poster out of it, and that was really what was called the first Langton's classification. So the actual idea about it was really to build an interest in the auction market, and try and get some more currency going for other labels, and that was what that was all about. It's been around for quite some time now. I mean, I have nothing to do with it anymore, but in theory, it's been quite an important kind of thing for fine Australian wine, because it helped create a fine wine agenda.
It absolutely did. And it's wonderful. I think in your career history, there's always been something that has pushed Australia forward, that has drawn attention to what we do exceptionally well. And I think you continue to do that. I will get to the Australian Ark a little bit later. But in terms of where you went after Langton's, you had a few things on the go, but I'd love to know a little bit about your Master of Wine experience. How long did it take you? And did you find it challenging?
I did find it challenging, but when I tell you how long it took me, it might take you surprise you, because while I was going through it, it felt like an eternity. But it actually took me 2 years and 10 weeks.
Wow!
And the reason why I know it's precisely that is because I decided I was going to do the Master of Wine exam 10 weeks before taking the exam. And I passed the theory first go, but my tasting was, I passed well, if that makes sense to you, the first time. And then the following year, I passed really badly. And in fact, Michael Hill-Smith, who's quite a well-known MW, in fact, I saw him the other day a couple of days ago with his beautiful Toll Puddle wines, and he actually said, well, we don't think you should be doing the exam the following year. And I said, rubbish. I just said, it's just technique more than anything else. And so he interceded on my behalf, and I was allowed to do the exam the following year, and I got the Bollinger Medal for being the best taster in the world. And the thing is, I always talk about the Institute of Masters of Wine being a bit like the Ministry of Funny Handshakes. You have to understand the funny handshake, and then you will pass. It's not just about your knowledge; it's about technique and how you argue and debate and all of that kind of stuff. So, it was learning and understanding that side of things that was the most challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there are people who have done it for a lot longer. One of the people who I admire most in the world of wine is a guy called Matthew Deller, who runs Wirra Wirra. He's the CEO of Wirra Wirra. He failed. He failed a lot, and then he kind of left it, came back again, and then he passed. And he's one of the most effective and most outstanding wine experts in the world. I mean, failure is something that really does generate success. I think that's the big story. I think that young people should understand.
Yeah, in particular, that maybe that moment of popping something away, coming back to it at another time. I think often we think, nope, that's not for me, and move on, and never ever, if there's regrets there, or if, it's going to be something that sits unwell with you for a long time, it might be worth revisiting. And like you said, we're older, we're wiser, we might have a very different approach. So I really, like you said, really respect people like that.
Yeah, totally. And, it even extends, because one of the things I love doing is painting. And when I started painting in oils, it was absolutely terrible. I kind of said, bloody hell, I can't do this. And I stopped. And then I took up oils again about 5 or 8 years later, and I never looked back. And I think it's also perspective and attitude, which changes with maturity and perspectives and all of that kind of stuff.
Is there anything like a hobby that you've done that you were rubbish at that you were still rubbish at? Just for all us plebs out there, it'd be really nice to know.
Well, as a painter, that's something I would love to be a great painter. I'm not a great painter. I'm an amateur painter. I know a lot of people like my paintings and all of that kind of stuff, but I would like to be so much better than I am. When I see some of the stuff that people do, particularly people who do portraits, and I'm just in awe of them. So I'm actually, again, it's all perspectival, isn't it? I'm probably seen to be good by some people, but I don't think I'm very good, because I know what I should be and what I could be if I put more effort into it.
Well, you worked with Woolworths and Endeavour for quite some time, but you did make a decision in 2003 to kind of move away and work more independently. Was the Australian Ark something that encouraged you to move away from that side? Was that something that had been sitting with you that you really wanted to do? You told me it took you 17 years to research it. Yeah,
no, it did. So I'll kind of explain it too. So when Langton's was acquired by Woolworths in 2007, I'd been working on a project, prior to that, and I was really, as with an auction, as an auctioneer and all the old bottles that were being sold, I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to update Max Lake's beautiful book, Classic Wines of Australia, which was published in 1967. And so I was working on that. And then, of course, the acquisition, I knew my world would completely change. And so it did. And so I kind of shelved it. But I kind of knew that I needed to keep doing all of this. So I was constantly researching, writing articles and stuff like that. And, and then, a little while later, I was renewing the Langton's classification work. I was doing quite a lot of background work on that. And then when I was there, the trouble is working with corporates and stuff is that they're run by people who, are basically looking forwards, not backwards. There's some really lovely people, of course, but there are also people who are not particularly talented. In fact, they're good at running spreadsheet and managing up so that they look good, but they're not very good at all. And you have very, very few visionaries and that type of thing. And basically, they put a kibosh on it. And I was so pissed off that I just pulled everything apart, took out everything, regarding Langton's classification, or very, except for its historic side of things, and started again, pulled in all these other articles and stuff like that, and then started working around that and getting it to becoming the Australian Ark. That's basically what happened. So I was kind of motivated by frustration and a little bit of anger, because I think that the whole thing about the fine wine auction business, should be all about supporting Australians' fine wine agenda, and the business had all the resources to be doing things like that, but it was more interested in just building the business, and as most corporates do, it's all about making money. It's not about anything else.
When you look at something like the Australian Ark, for people that haven't written books, it just seems momentous. Was there ever a time you think it wasn't going to happen?
No, because it was always going to happen, one way or the other. I was determined that it was going to happen, and but the way it's happened is precisely what I wanted it to be. But what I have to say to you is writing a book like this is not something you start and then you keep going, or it's kind of project that just kind of happens over a long period of time. The best way of just, there's an advert says keep walking, with Johnny Walker, and that's basically what I did. I just kept going. And one of the best things that happened for me was COVID, because I'd already got up to a first draft by COVID, but it was grossly inadequate. And so over COVID, I had time to really, because I wasn't traveling much and doing that, and I really got it up to speed. And then I bumped into Angus Hewson, who who's got a doctorate in wine tasting. He's quite an entrepreneurial person, and I was talking to him about the book and said I actually had a publisher in the UK, but I said I was just frustrated because the communications just doesn't work for me, and I just think they're the wrong people. And Angus said, well, why don't we self-publish it together? And I looked at him and I thought, really, with you? And about a week later, I kind of was thinking about it, and he followed it up. And I thought, well, with someone who's got here's a wine writer, normally a very competitive and, kind of protective of their space. And here's a guy who's really keen to get it, off the ground. And I thought, hey, this is absolutely brilliant. And Angus has proven to be an absolutely exceptional partner in this, kind of project. And we've literally got the book published exactly how I envisaged. I mean, it was a $1.2 million project, and we only just got to parity about a week ago. I.e., we've got no debts, no nothing. We've managed to make it a commercially viable, not profitable, but it was never going to be. We never thought it would be that way. It's a not-for-profit organisation anyway, but we managed to get over the line. But it was an enormous task. I can't tell you, how challenging it was getting it to print.
I can't even comprehend, but I think that, at the end of the day, your heart and Angus's heart is in the right place when you talked about that supporting the fine wine agenda and really wanting Australia to continue their wonderful legacy of what they offer the world. I think that is probably is what is both at your hearts, and that's why that partnership has worked so well.
No, I think that's right. But it's not only that. One of the things I'm never going to die wondering, Shanteh, in terms of the wine community, the wine media have been absolutely phenomenal behind in their support and encouragement and everything like that. Everyone has been absolutely brilliant. But one of the things that we're actually doing with the Australian Ark, because now that we've got to parity, that all the sales of the books now is all cream. And in theory, we've probably got another income of about $150,000, maybe a little bit more, maybe a bit less. And it'll be very intimate as this comes in. But we've changed the name of the holding business from the Australian Ark Project to the Australian Ark Foundation. And part of the, this kind of research in the book is just the astonishing, kind of foundations that we have based on our surviving 19th century and early 20th century vineyards. All this genetic vine stock material, there's pre-phylloxera, all our distinguished vineyard sites and stuff like that. And so I'm really keen, as is Angus and a few others, is to start a new project, which is basically supporting Australia's fine wine agenda based on the foundation of our historic past. And we seem to be moving not at a glacial pace, but we're gathering a little bit of momentum now. And we've already kind of sponsoring a prize at the Barossa Wine Show for wine from 100-year-old vines or more. So I mean, those that kind of thing, I think, is just kind of moving the dial in the right direction.
It couldn't come at a better time for the wine industry, I think. And I think we often ask that question, if not me, then who, or who will do these things? We all need it, but the need is there, and there's so many people willing to support. So I think the Australian Ark Foundation is going to do incredible things, and I really think it's needed. So well done.
Well, I hope so. I mean, it's early beginnings, so it's not really to say well done, but I think a lot of people see that there is benefit of that. And I think one of the issues about government organizations or quasi-government organizations is that they take a long time to get moving on things, because they need to get consensus and they need to get funding and they need to go all those things, whereas this Australian Ark Foundation, I think, will be a lot more nimble, and as a consequence to that, will be able to move things along a bit more quickly. On the other hand, there will be barriers of one thing or another, but I'm absolutely convinced that that we need to portray ourselves, particularly not only here but also overseas. We can do a lot better job, because Australia's making, as well as being a reviewer and everything, is making some of the most beautiful wines in its history, and there are many wines that are as good, if not better, than some of the great wines of the world. And everything where you see, if you want to buy a really good kind of bottle of Chardonnay, I mean, why wouldn't you go to Australia and buy, something like Gioconda or Lewin Estate or the Art Series, or their ilk, because they are great value compared to a lot of the Burgundy wines, and not only that, they're often better.
That's for sure. And I think that voice, that collective voice of Australia to the rest of the world, is where that is going to lie. And yes, it's not going to happen overnight, but
no. It's just doing it. Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of presaging it, kind of forward. And of course, we've got a wonderful, kind of younger generation of people coming through, and they need to step up. And all of those people who've been, kind of the voice box for Australian wine for so many years need to step back a little bit to allow fresh stories to emerge.
Well said. I do want to know, after the Australian Ark came out and you hold that in your hand for the first time, I mean, you had Angus was telling me about how many people came forward with these beautiful photos and their stories. Do you feel a sense of responsibility to the people that helped you gather all that information when you're holding it and you've got this in your hands? Does it feel that it belongs to you or to, the greater community?
Well, it's if you open up the first page, you'll see the dedication, and the dedication is to the next generation. So, that kind of really explains, the whole motivation behind it. I didn't write it because, well, first of all, as I said, it's a not-for-profit, and I haven't, other than a few expenses paid, I haven't been paid, brass razoo for it, because in the end, I felt it was something that needed to be done, and the only way to get it done was to do it that way. It's not mine. It belongs to the wine industry. Of course it does. And the whole purpose of it is for the next generation to feel extremely proud of what previous generations have done, because our story is just so romantic and magnificent. I don't think there's any country in the world that has a story like ours. And it's barely being told. And it's been barely being told because people have forgotten. They're forgotten. And I don't quite understand why that's happened, but I think it's partly because of the way the industry is structured. It's partly because of the characters. It's partly because of, what people think the consumer wants to know. But really, we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of what we can tell about Australian wine. And I think that's not only incredible, I think it's just such a great opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, you recently won the Mount Pleasant Maurice Shea Award at the Australian Wine Industry Awards for all the work that you have done. You've had plenty of acknowledgements and awards. Does that still mean a lot to you when you get up and get a beautiful trophy?
Well, it's been a very, very strange year for me because, early in this year I had a massive health crisis, and as a consequence of that, I had to be operated on, and I was sitting on a sofa for 4 or 5 months to recover from it. And when all these awards, I couldn't always go and collect it. So, Angus and our other co-publisher David Longfield went to London to pick up the Andre Simon Award, and so a lot of these awards were coming through when I was just simply, not well enough. So, it's been incredible, all these things coming through. I never really thought about the things that I have done, and I think the Australian Ark has probably opened people's eyes a little bit about what has been done and everything like that. But I know this is going to sound really funny, but the thing this year I'm most happy to be is alive, and getting these awards are extremely fulfilling, I have to say. But kind of combined those highs and lows, it has been an absolutely extraordinary year. It's almost embarrassing now because, people come up and say, well, what award haven't you won? And, I have to say that I'm very, very aware that there are a lot of people who have done magnificent things for the Australian wine industry, and the awards haven't been shared out much this year anyway. So.
You're such a gentleman and very humble in the way that you approach life, but are very well deserving of everything that's come your way. And I think the Australian industry as a whole has a lot to thank you for. I do want to know a little bit about when Andrew Caillard's on the couch, maybe when you're in full health. What are the drinks that you reach for? What if you could only drink 3 today? What would they be?
Well, I actually nowadays I rarely touch beer, and I very, very rarely touch spirits or anything else. The most frequent drink I have is water, of course, but that doesn't count. I tend to, I review wines and stuff like that. So when bottles of wine come in, I'm trying to reduce it a little bit. But, so therefore it's really eclectic, because sometimes I might be tasting a whole lot of Pinot Noirs, and so I'm drinking Pinot Noir one time, Chardonnay another, Riesling or whatever it might be. So, if I take away all those kind of samples and stuff like that, I've always, and it's because I've also done a lot of, I've kind of been so linked to the Penfolds for such a long time. I actually really enjoy drinking their wines. I mean, I can't afford Grange or anything like that, but, I enjoy Centauri, for instance, and I think it's an absolutely, gorgeous drink. And, I was mentioning, kind of Cullen, Kevin John Chardonnay or whatever, but I'm not drinking wines that are necessarily expensive all the time. I'm, often drinking, kind of lesser ones. And I don't want to talk about any wines from overseas. I do drink a little bit of that, but, in the context of what we're talking about, I really believe in Australian wine, and I'd rather, focus people's attention to that rather than anything else.
Well, I think that when you talk, it is uplifting. And I know that the people tuning in to this podcast are going to feel uplifted by what you've said today, and hopefully more determined to go out and be part of their communities to tell the Australian story. And here's looking at you, the next generation. Make sure you pull your socks up and do your part too.
It's a really important thing because, the Australian, wine is in crisis all over the world. And I think a lot of it is because of the way wine is marketed, and I think it doesn't have to be this way. But wine needs to become relevant again, but particularly with the younger generations. And a part of that is taking away the snobbery and all of that kind of stuff. The whole kind of wine and food matching is really interesting. But if you only got one bottle in the fridge, well, bloody hell, whether it's white or red doesn't really matter what it is. Enjoy it with whatever you're eating that night. So I think in the end, we need to kind of send the message or encourage people to enjoy wine is something that is shared, which promotes conversations and a healthy lifestyle. I mean, there are a lot of wowsers out there, talking about how bad it is for you. But I reckon, wine in moderation, of course, is such a great thing, and it's such a good thing for mental health as well, because you're sharing it with people, you're discussing, and you're relaxed, and a lot of the world's problems can be solved over a glass of wine.
I totally agree with you. And I do think that we are seeing wine in moderation. We are moving that way, and that's wonderful. We just hope that wine is still a part of that conversation, and it's not just drinks in moderation. And it is the social lubricant that has been so important for so long. So, Andrew, it has been such a joy. I love any conversation with you. I love how broad your mind works, because we could go into detail about, lots of things to do with the wine industry, but equally in many other topics. And that is, the scope of the way your incredible brain and heart works. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
That's a pleasure. It was lovely talking to you, Shanteh. Really lovely. Cheers.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.